There we go. I've locked
Okay,
the meeting. Okay.
all right. So we are going to get going. I'll be picking in random order. 1 minute opening statement. And let's get going.
Hi, thank you. My name is Rick Shepard, and I want to be your congressman because climate change is an existential threat. Healthcare is a human right, and we need a universal basic income. This pandemic before us has laid bare the failures of our for-profit healthcare system. Our lack of a social safety net has caused desperation that's resulting in looting, fires, and even more violent assaults against the minorities and suffering peoples in our world. We are better than this. We are trillionaires living with lead in our water. We are trillionaires with hookworm disease. The wealth and income inequality in our country is a staggering result of decades of policy failure. Policy failures brought about by failures in the leadership on both sides, and I'm here to bring an end to it. I'm Rick Shepard, and I will lead by lifting from the bottom, starting with the least among us, and doing the most good for the most people. Thank you. Thank you, and you're absolutely right. So climate change is an existential threat, and it is my #1 concern because once the planet's hostile to human life, nothing else matters. We already established that, and that's a known quantity. So the question is, what are we going to do? What specifics do we have in mind? As part of a national infrastructure program, we are going to bring clean water into the state of Nevada. Nevada has nowhere left to dig. There are no more sources of clean water. We're not going to stop growing or stop using. And the indigenous peoples, the native flora and fauna, the autochthonous horses, all the natural springs, everything that is the natural beauty of Nevada ultimately starts and stops with access to water. And since there's nowhere else to pull it from, we are going to desalinate and bring it in. As part of a national infrastructure program, we will bring clean water into Nevada. We will bring clean water into Flint, Michigan and replace those pipes. We will get the salt water out of Florida. We will reverse desertification. And all of this takes place on a national level. These are good paying domestic jobs that cannot be exported. We will begin reversing the 417 parts per million of CO2 that are in the atmosphere through carbon capture and sequestration, as well as reversing the desertification. Here in Nevada, we have 80,000 metric tons of nuclear waste that they want to send to Yucca Mountain to bury for 100,000 years. That is untenable. We will reprocess that. We will use them in thorium reactors, and we will use it to power these desalination facilities. We will use it to provide green power. We will provide radiological isotopes for medicine. We will provide the RTG fuels for NASA's deep space missions. We will take that carbon, we will synthesize dimethyl ether to replace diesel fuel so that we're no longer having to extract that from the ground. We will do the same thing with ethanol, turning what remaining gas and diesel vehicles are on the road into carbon neutral cycles. Once we're no longer extracting from the ground to get these fuels, we can stop pretending to care about gas stations like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East and stop exerting our international forces over there under the auspices of exporting freedom when it's really a resource grab. You want to deal with climate change, you have to deal with world peace. And here in Nevada, our water is going to be dependent upon our well-being with respects to power and world peace. And as part of this solution, we will be able to flip on its head the environment, not just the environmental damage that we're doing, but the economic damage here in Nevada. Nevada imports $8 billion a year in hydrocarbon fuels. We can become net exporters. We will be a new industry here in this state and part of a new freedom for our country. Energy independence means independence. We've seen what it's like to be on the losing end of supply chains that get broken. And this healthcare crisis is a perfect example of what it's like when you wait for others to send you stuff you need. And we can't afford to do that anymore. We certainly can't afford to do that with power. And that's part of what we're going to do with the Green New Deal. Thank you. America is the only country on earth, or at least the only industrialized country on earth, that has a for-profit healthcare system, and we have seen how it is failing right now. But even before this outbreak, the failures were pretty obvious out in the rural counties. When you don't have a large enough population to support an industry, if your industry is capitalist, that industry will leave. And that is exactly what has happened with healthcare in the rurals. The answer to this is and has been in a bill that's sitting on the House and the Senate waiting to be brought up. The Medicare for All plan that Senator Sanders has put forth eliminates this problem. Not only does it expand healthcare on Medicare to everyone and expand those services to include dental, vision, hearing, and mental health, and not only does it take care of all the copays and the premiums and the deductibles that would normally be associated with it, but by doing direct funding to rural establishments, you provide the necessary support that a for-profit system simply will not do. Add to that, we will offer improved reimbursement rates for services provided at these underserved communities. Rural and poor communities that don't have help will have the direct funding to keep the clinics open. And then the doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers who are participants in those clinics will be paid more for the services they provide as a result of an inducement to get them out there. This works, and it absolutely cannot work under a capitalist model. It only works under a true universal healthcare system, just like 32 out of 33 industrialized nations already figured out years ago. Whenever you hear a politician use weasel words like access or affordability or public option, what they're saying is, we're going to continue to allow the insurance company to be a part of your decision-making process. We are going to continue to allow the insurance companies and their rapacious greed to deny you services and deny you coverage and force you to settle for whatever it is they're willing to give you. Anything short of universal health care is a giveaway to corporations and billionaires that don't need it. If you truly want to make this world a better place and do the most good for the most people, starting with the least among us, you start with strong social programs like universal health care, and you don't tie it to your employment, you don't tie it to means testing, and at no point do you turn someone away because they're not interested in being in a network or part of a plan. These divisions, these barriers, are put in there to prevent you from getting the healthcare you need so that they can keep the profits that they want. This has to die. There is no excuse for this to continue. Your life is worth more than this. And for you to have to jump through a hoop so that Aetna can tell you no, that's unacceptable. And the rural counties have had it worse than the rest of us because of this healthcare system that we have. And we will change it with a Medicare for All solution.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate the detailed answer. That was great. And I'm going to go ahead and stay with you, Rick, on the next question. Move right into it. You know, I've been hearing this. We are often aware of the horrible consequences of Citizens United and a lot of apparent agreement that it needs to be overturned. What is your specific plan to accomplish that and your steps to proceed with the proposed implementation to get rid of it? Do you have one?
If we reverse Citizens United today, it would be a strong step in the right direction, but it wouldn't solve the problem. And we've had money in politics for as long as I've been alive, if not longer. Citizens United is a symptom of a problem, but it is not the problem itself. Getting money out of politics is the goal. Now, we have a constitutionally protected right to petition our government, and we have every right, though, to tell those people that they can't be paid to do so. Lobbying is fine, but we can get rid of paid lobbying, and that would go a long way towards getting rid of some of these negative influences. We have leadership on both sides of the aisle that cater to the interests of the 1%. We have to stand up to all of them, irrespective of party affiliation, and recognize that when their policies and their platforms differ from what we need, that we will stand up to them, we will call them out, we will use our bully pulpit to deliver our message, and if necessary, we will withhold our vote. Because if ultimately you give your vote to someone you disagree with, then you have not only empowered them to do what they were going to do anyway, but you have bequeathed to them all that implied support and all that implied value that you have as part of your vote. Are you a progressive voice? Did you give that voice to a person who is not? You have just given them your progressive power. We are better than this. Stand up to your leaders one by one. Let them know that their actions are unacceptable. Call them out when they don't live up to your expectations and be detailed. And don't be afraid just because they wear the same color jacket you do. You don't get to hide behind some notions like vote blue no matter who and expect us to be on board with it. We have more than enough failed politicians on both sides to recognize that it isn't a team. There's no left, right, red, blue. It is the 1% versus the rest of us. And the policies are what matter. It's not a question of identity politics or what team you're on or who endorses or supports you or how much money you can raise. It has to do with your policy positions and whether or not they align with those of the voters. And I think that I've aligned quite well. We saw Bernie Sanders run away with this state by over 20 points in February, running on the same progressive policy platforms that I'm using. The same platforms that reach across Democrats to independents and Republicans and nonpartisans from the urbans and the rural communities. And that's how we're going to win this election.
This is something, I will lay a little bit of background. Depending on the location you're in, there are areas, particularly here in Douglas County, and I know other areas around the state, where we do not even have any say in the primaries at all for people for county commission and other challenges. It's a big deal for some of us. So my question, starting with Ed, would you favor an open primary plan to allow voters to have the ability to vote for all candidates in primary and general elections? For example, eliminating the ability to bypass the general by only winning a primary or having elected seats that only one party can vote for.
On this call may even remember that there was a period of time when I was pushing for open primaries as one of the changes in our own functions here in Nevada. That and automatic voter registration, ranked choice voting, and mail-in ballots. And I'll be damned, but it hasn't turned out that I got most of what I looked for. You can certainly look at the states that have mail-in ballots and the successes for turnout and see what a good idea that is. Automatic voter registration is already in play here. And really the only difference between what we have now and what I would like to see is that I don't want incarcerated people losing their right to vote. I believe that your right to vote is sacrosanct, and there's nothing, not even imprisonment, that should deprive you of your right to participate in that. Opening the primary is a great way to get more involvement, and we saw that happen in this cycle in February with ranked choice voting as well, added onto it. Ultimately, I would like to see it be a nonpartisan concern. The fact that we have parties who are private, for-profit corporations that, in the case of the Democratic Party, swore in a court of law under oath that it will betray you when it wants to. It's challenging to justify fealty to such an organization. And when there's no law to prevent them from doing whatever they want to do, it's even more challenging to see all the good people that I know and see all the hard work that they're doing, putting forth these changes to rules, putting forth these changes to policies that ultimately trickle up in some diluted form to state and federal concerns. And then what finally lands as policy will be in place right up to the moment that it is inconvenient, and then it is ignored and they do whatever they want. We saw the rigging in the 2016 primary, and we've seen manipulations before and since. And so if you want to address the concerns, yeah, open primaries is a great idea, and we should do it, along with ranked choice voting and mail-in ballots and automatic voter registration. But ultimately, if you want to actually be part of the solution, we're going to have to either push for legislation that makes it impossible for organizations like the DNC to do what they did in 16, or we are going to have to replace the leadership at the DNC with people who we can trust won't behave in that way again. Otherwise, what you're doing is for naught. Now, I am the child of an alcoholic, abusive parent. I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of unjustifiable malice, and then for no reason at all, continue to forgive, continue to give them another chance, thinking next time they won't be like this again. It took years to get over that. And I fear that there's a lot of that going on here now. Every single one of you is better than this. Every single one of you deserves more than this. Every single one of you should be able to trust that when your will is spoken, that it is heard and respected, not ignored. And if you're going to do that, it's a hell of a lot more than open primaries. Thank you.
This question is, we hear too often that Democrats are lacking in policies and are only running in opposition to Trump. How would you counter this message by getting our policies more prominently and favorably recognized in public discussions?
I think I'm good with the question, but I would like to change it a bit in that the question was, how will we convince or sway the opposition that we're not what they're presenting? And that's not exactly accurate. I would acknowledge where they're correct. And if you want to build a coalition, you start by recognizing where you agree. And the fact is, there are legitimate criticisms of the Democratic leadership that we as underlings to it have to address and point out and change. Now, you can talk about how you want to expand Social Security or other social programs like I do, which is great, but the Democratic Party's official position is exactly the same. However, the Democratic's presumptive presidential nominee has not only said, but tried on no fewer than 4 occasions to undercut social programs, specifically Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So is that our policy or is it not? We have to address that. According to our stated policies, we want to have a capital gains tax rate increase, but it was Obama that made the Bush tax cuts permanent. We have a stated policy of interest in increasing the minimum wage. Obama made no efforts to increase the minimum wage despite having a filibuster-proof supermajority for 5.5 months. Efforts to expand public education. Similarly, we've seen cuts in funding. And then when they do have funding, they move to something that's means tested, block grants, contingent, more restrictions, more impediments. So are we a people's party? Are we trying to improve social programs and the well-beings of the least among us? Because if we are, as our stated positions show, we must also be prepared to point out where the leadership is failing to live up to that. We've gone on ad nauseum about how the Senate is fast-tracking judges. Chuck Schumer has to allow that. We've gone on ad nauseum about the ridiculous actions of our executive branch, but it was Nancy Pelosi that gave him a $131 billion increase to his military budget. And that's $30 billion more than he even asked for. That's not resisting, that is empowering. At no point did we try to rein in the drone strikes or the warrantless wiretapping. From the leadership level at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they say yes to Wall Street. They say yes to deregulation. They say no to healthcare, no to increasing the minimum wage. They'd say all the things that the 1% want and reject the rest of us. And unless and until you're ready to accept that truth and speak it yourself, you're not ready to move forward. Thank you.
Next round with Rick Shepard. And the question is, the HUD definition of affordable housing is one that a household can obtain for 30% or less of its income. What are your plans to get a bill passed or to instigate a public initiative to accomplish this goal?
The idea that we are going to have housing that is subsidized or public housing presupposes that we continue to have the existing system. It necessitates that there be an underclass to which we must always be aware and serve in some specific way, that the system of governance and economics that we create for ourselves requires that there be a subservient group. That's one step short of slavery. There's no interest in making legislation to make affordable housing. I want legislation to make housing not a problem for anyone. You know, making affordable housing it's alienating. It takes a group of people and it identifies them as other, and then makes we the people have to throw some tax dollars at them in this judgmental way. And hopefully at some point in the future, there won't be enough waste, fraud, and abuse to corrupt yet this government system as well. This is nonsense. We are better than this. These kinds of means-tested programs they're not taken up by the people who are most deserving, oftentimes out of shame. And then there's no motivation or mechanism to get them out of these once they're in place. So if you want to do something about low-income housing problems, start addressing the problem of low income in the first place. And the housing problem kind of solves itself. You know, we have 500,000 homeless people, but we have 6 million empty homes. We don't have distribution of these houses. That's the only shortcoming. They're not absent. We don't need to build new properties. We just have to put people in them. You know, it would take $20 billion to end homelessness in America. $20 billion is less than what we spent giving big ag settlement from the tariffs after the soybeans from Trump's tariffs. $20 billion is a week or so of DOD funding. There's no, that's a trivial amount of money. And again, that's less than the increase that beyond of what Trump asked for his military budget. So if we just allocate those resources appropriately, this problem solves itself. And I don't like the idea of creating another structure for low-income housing. I'd rather address the issue of low income. And we can do that through things like universal basic income and making colleges and tuition free, as well as universities and vocational training. We start lifting people up Maslow's hierarchy, and we stop having to create little special exceptions for those that got left behind. Stop leaving people behind, and we don't have this problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ed. So this is one, and the reason I'm going to bring it up is I've got multiple requests with very, very similar questions. This is going to step just about a minute each outside our format, but I'm going to start with the candidates just as you are shown on my screen here, give you 1 minute each and convince all of us on the call that you are able to beat Mark Amadei and how, and you get 1 minute to do that. This is your speed dating test. So I'm going to go ahead.
Vulnerable because this programs that he has been on the wrong side of are needed by all of us. You can go out to the rural counties right now and talk to people that are anti-Mark Amadei, even though they might be even Trump supporters because of his votes on healthcare and the environment. Sticking to the issues and staying away from partisans and tribalists, we can move forward by bringing this coalition of people who know that universal healthcare is a human right and climate change is an existential threat. We don't have the freedoms to do less than everything. We must put everything we have on the table, and we can do it all with the social media that's allowed to us right now. And once we get back out and can do it for real, we will be marching physically. In the meantime, you can go to markamadei.com. I own that website, and he wasn't willing to put up the time and effort to get it for himself. So start there, and we'll take the fight forward from that.
Cool. Thank you, Rick. Okay.